Hello, everyone. Thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us at our Summer 2024 Virtual Lightning Talk Extravaganza. This program was developed by the Digital Scholarship Section's Professional Development Committee in collaboration with both the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and the Outreach Committee. Thank you to our presenters, ACRL staff, and DSS committee members for their coordinated effort. In the spirit of encouraging equity, diversity, and inclusion in the DSS community and beyond, I will read this brief statement. Please take a moment and review the guidelines on this slide. We, the DSS community, agree to frame interactions in DSS activities with these guidelines in mind. We recognize that whenever we engage as a community, we will all make mistakes and that may unintentionally harm individuals or groups. But we agree to take responsibility for the results of our words and actions. We expect that all DSS meetings will begin with a brief review of these agreements so that they may become standard activities in the section. Next, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today, our presenters. First is Halie Kerns, the User Experience and Emerging Technology Librarian at CUNY Brooklyn College. And Kelly will share proactive listening, engaging in social justice with your community via curated resource displays. Halie Kerns is the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Binghamton University, and Leah Fitzgerald is the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at SUNY Canton. They will present Crap Attack, Successes and Failures Leading a Gaming Project in the Library. Kai Fei, the Discovery and Access Strategic Projects Manager at Harvard Library, will present Project Management as Community Building, launching the Harvard Library Collections Digitization Program. And Simon Ringsmuth, Digital Services Librarian at Oklahoma State University, will deliver Planning and Executing Successful Virtual Panel Discussions. Please hold all your questions to the end of the presentations, and we'll take questions then. So let's move on to our first presenter, Halie Kerns.
Great. I think I just need you to stop sharing so I can start sharing. Great. Thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and get started. So, as mentioned, we're talking about proactive listening and engaging in social justice with your community via curated resource displays. And I currently work at CUNY in New York City at Brooklyn College, but while I was doing the work that I'm going to talk about today, I was at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, California. It's a mostly graduate level serving institution, relatively small, about 1,000 students, with a strong programs in mental health and counseling, amongst other things. So getting into it, something that we noticed was that when we were doing sort of book and resource displays on things like traditional themes such as banned books or Halloween, we weren't getting a lot of interest. They were sort of being stale, not getting a lot of attention. So we thought that we might dig a little bit deeper into the concerns or interests that our community has. So even though something like Halloween's really fun, maybe there's going to be more of an interest in how Dia de los Muertos is celebrated in the mission community of San Francisco. And then we think about like, how can we reflect these interests and concerns back to our community to be supportive? Well, how do we even find out about these interests? One of the major ways that we were able to discover what our community was interested in was within our reference interactions. And so we just sort of were noticing the topics and things that kept coming up at the desk, via email, on the telephone, chat during our one-on-one consultations, maybe even in the hallways. And we were a small team, so we'd often talk about things that we kept noticing. Maybe you're in a really big team and that's not possible, but perhaps you're noticing things over and over again. So for instance, something that came up repeatedly across the disciplines was to decolonize this or decolonize that. And we realized that we didn't really have a handy resource to share within reference or to have discoverable on our site. And so we put together this Decolonize the Mind LibGuide. Since a lot of our students were commuters and we also had a lot of online programs, for the most part, our displays were digital first and physical second. And so this was a great tool that we could use in reference. And we also noticed that one of the books, the one with the footprint, was being used as a textbook in several classes. So we were able to up our licenses on that to make it available to more students across more classes. Another thing that also came up was looking at this or that through a critical feminist or intersectional feminist lens. And again, we had a lot of resources on that topic, but not necessarily something cohesive that we could just share. Both of these things were things that we knew that we had, but our community didn't. And making these sorts of resources and sharing them through newsletters and on our website and during interactions made it so that the community felt like we understood their research interest and what they were doing. Another way is to find out about concerns and interests is to find out what's going on around the community. I'm speaking from an academic perspective, so we would keep an eye on the different clubs and organizations on campus. Sometimes there were very niche study groups, so we got to learn about what they were interested in, like a psychedelic therapy interest group. And events that happened on campus. We had a drama department and an art curation department and several other events that would happen on campus. And then just keeping track of sort of local concerns that tended to come through the library doors, things that were happening in San Francisco or nationally that seemed to impact our students. So we discovered that there was a burgeoning sort of club called the Black Psychology Project at CIIS, which is the acronym for California Institute of Integral Studies. And we jumped on it and we were like, wow, how can we support this amazing project? We have a large psychology department in our school, and this is sort of an area that we haven't highlighted. So we came up with this draft and then shared it with some students that were putting this project together. And they were like so surprised and excited that we had taken the initiative to do so. And we worked together. A faculty member had a really awesome bibliography that they shared with us. And so we put up books that we already had and also purchased books that we didn't have, really filling gaps in our collection and being able to serve our students' interests in this club better. It's now a big center at the school, so we're really proud to have been able to support them in this way as they were getting started. Another thing that happened to come up in our emails is that the faculty and staff were having a training on trans and gender expansive resources and ideas across campus. And so again, we put together a draft and shared it with the faculty that were the founding members of this training task force that they're putting on this series. Again, they were really surprised that we had put that initiative together, super excited, share their bibliography with us. We worked together on what should be included, what shouldn't, what should we definitely purchase to make up for this. And you can see very small, but there's more than just books on here. We learned about different websites, organizations, and films that we could stream that could be helpful for this training series, which wound up being complementary with the flyer. They shared our guide along with all the training sessions and announcements about it. It sort of gave a little more gravitas to the training series to show that this is important work that we were doing as a faculty and staff. And then also the faculty that were involved became more involved with the library in general, seeking us out for more instruction, putting in more requests for course reserves, and generally giving us a shout out with their colleagues to contact us. Other things you can do that are a little bit more passive to stay in the know is to sign up for newsletters and email lists across your college or community where you might learn about what's sort of going on. A lot of clubs and organizations and so on campus have social media accounts, so you could follow them. Check out those physical bulletin boards. A lot of things were discovered on there that I may not have come across otherwise. And something that can be really interesting is to take a look at your circulation statistics across your books, ebooks, articles. What sort of things are sort of coming up again and again? And as you probably know, there are waves of interest, but that can be a really helpful way to sort of capture the what's going on in the zeitgeist of your community. And of course, feel free to just get involved in any way that you can. So when we're creating these sorts of displays, we tended to not reach out until we had some sort of draft with interested parties like faculty and students. Just sort of reaching out cold sort of was scary, I think, and so we didn't get a lot of response. But when we had already created something, we tended to get a lot of buy-in and interest to provide more feedback. Like I said, we received bibliographies, different links, podcasts, and organizations that we could consider looking into. And if you're able to purchase new titles to fill in, collection gaps, do it if you can squeeze that in. And consider things more than just books, as I've mentioned, like podcasts and perhaps videos you maybe already have in your streaming collection. And sometimes you might consider accepting art or decorative items for physical displays when you do that. For instance, we knew on campus that our art curator was working with a faculty member on a display in our lobby about the Zapatista movement in Chiapas. And once we reached out with our draft of display, the faculty member was again really delighted and said, "Hey, there were some things that didn't make it into the actual gallery exhibit that I would love for you to put in your display." So we got some wonderful paintings and textiles that we were able to borrow from Chiapas. So that is all to say that, this can be challenging to pursue. We won't even get into different political climates across different regions, but certainly we are always pressed for time. Budgets, I don't know anyone that has a great one. And sometimes when we try to do this sort of outreach with our community, it can feel like we're shouting into the void. But I encourage you to consider it because there are benefits. It helped to identify and fill gaps in our collection. We, shifted things around to do so. And it increased use of library services and resources. I talked about the faculty that were actually involved with the event, but also we noticed that, we're getting more students coming in, more talk in the hallway about like, did you know the library did this or that? And it made our community feel heard and valued. We had another display on a particular topic, and the students were just so delighted that we had taken an interest in it. And sometimes, since we were a commuter school and had a lot of online programs, our students sometimes felt siloed and not part of the community, but seeing their interests reflected back to them sort of brought that community feel for just a moment at least. And of course, we learned a lot too about our own lives and praxis, how we, work with our community, and we learned a lot along the way. Certainly, you're probably doing a lot of these things already, or maybe there are a lot of things that you want to do but you can't. But I hope that this presentation at least gives you inspiration one way or another to, do some proactive listening for your community and reflect back to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Next up, we have Halie and Leah.
Hey, yeah, give me 1 second. see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Halie Kerns. I'm a digital scholarship librarian at Binghamton University, and I'm presenting here today with my former colleague.
I'm Leah Fitzgerald, and my new title is now Assistant Director at Amsterdam Free Library.
So we're here today to talk about a project we did while we were both working at SUNY Canton. I was the Access Services Librarian, and Leah was Instruction and Outreach. And we started this about a year after we had been there. As a sort of test to garner interest in digital projects at our institution. There wasn't really a digital scholarship presence, and we kind of wanted to try it out and see what would happen. Canton is a really small technology school in rural northern New York. Like the closest big city is like Ottawa, Canada. So there's not a ton going on in the area, and so we kind of wanted to see what interest we would get. There's about 3,000 full-time students, but only about half of them attend in person. And because it's a tech school, almost all the majors are career focused: criminal justice, nursing, cybersecurity. And one of the most popular programs was our video game design program. So we kind of tapped them for this project.
So the idea behind our project originally was to gamify some information literacy concepts, especially for our online accredited info lit class that the librarians teach, as well as our first year experience sections. And it was really important to us that the game could be asynchronous and accessed remotely, especially because the majority of students take at least one asynchronous online course every semester. And then our team, we ended up with a lot of students. There were the two librarians, so Halie and I, we had 3 coders, 2 artists, and 1 writer. And while we had the ideas, the students chose the tools and led the project down the line as we kept going. But we also met with them 2 to 3 times a semester because we had them for 2 semesters. And we would meet with them in person for doing updates and their evaluations so they could get paid. But otherwise, all of their work and communication was done remotely despite them being on campus. And in order to have them as paid interns, we used a new on-campus initiative called the Presidential Internship. It was in its 2nd semester when we started working with it. And so the president's office would set aside 25 possible internships for offices on campus to give students work experience that would pay them $1,000 each semester. And through that, we originally asked for 2 students, but because offices weren't interested in the program yet, we ended up with as many students as we wanted. And then for our outcomes, so for the students, first the internship outcomes that they needed, they had to work 10 hours a week for 12 weeks, and that was tracked through timesheets. And they also had to fulfill 4 different career competencies that we came up with through developing this internship. And so in order to get their payment, we had to evaluate them on these competencies. But it was also important for us that they were able to get real life work experience, especially working with a group of people that they do not know well. So they might have not known each other through their classes and stuff, and they did not know us beforehand. And as well to develop a project for their portfolios for when they're applying for jobs. We also wanted to develop a connection with them through the library because they are an underserved population on campus. And then finally, professional presentation experience. So they presented tools with us once on campus where they won first prize and one statewide through SUNY. And then for the library outcomes, we wanted to develop a playable game and focus on fulfilling a SUNY info lit core competency that all students need before they graduate, focusing on evaluating information with an awareness of authority, validity, and bias. We also want to test the library's ability to create, promote, and maintain digital scholarship work. And finally, center the library as a place on campus for creative collaborations with different uses.
So this is the team we ended up with. As we mentioned, we did this over 2 semesters, so fall and spring. And so initially, Leah and I, since we kind of had the idea, we thought, oh, we'll write it and then we'll just tell them to code it. Apparently, it's really, really hard to write a video game. So we ended up getting a student for that, Guy. He came on in the 2nd semester and he basically took our notes, wrote a narrative, created characters. We had an artist the 1st semester that didn't end up working out. So we had Matt the 2nd semester who did a really good job of designing the overall feel of the game, creating the interfaces, the characters, the fonts, and the aesthetics. And then we had 3 coders, Kyle, Clay, and Stephen, who worked with us both semesters. And basically they built the infrastructure of the game from scratch, designed the gameplay, the scoring. There was an in-game Wikipedia, they built that, and they did all the coding themselves, on top of really building the team and making it exactly what they wanted to be, running it, and also the data management of everything we created as well. And then Leah and I had the concept and let them run with it. We did all the administrative stuff, especially on the university side, getting them hired, supervising, and evaluating them.
So for our game concept, as Billy said, we came up with the original idea, but of course it's very hard to write a video game. And so together with our team, we came up with Craft Attack, where they are in a heavily censored dystopian world, and they are a fact checker for rare food quests. And the ultimate goal is to decide what sources to trust while writing articles for their newspaper. And we chose to use the prep test because it is widely taught in high schools in the area, and it's an easier concept for people who are brand new to doing research through unofficial survey classes. Many of the students that I came across never did any research in high school. So it was easy for them to start with vertical reading. And Craft Test also gives us great levels to work with while building the video game that they can build upon. And then from there, we had our interns choose the platforms that they were using, and they ended up going with open source and reproducible platforms. So they used Unity to build the code, which was okay, but only the students can navigate their own personal work. So then they used GitHub to share and update their code in order to bring all the branches together into a unified game.
Yeah, so I have some examples of the game design here. So basically, it's from the point of view of you as the fact checker, but there's additional characters that you meet in the game. So there was some, character game design. We also had dupes for popular social media outlets in the real world, and often tips were communicated through posts on those sites. So our artist came up with all of that. And basically, the interface was a screen in which you get emails and tips, and then you sort them in as unreliable or reliable. And the scoring is kind of done behind the scenes, and you find out at the end of the week how you did. But if you do get things wrong, if you sort them incorrectly, you get an email telling you what part of the craft test you failed to look into, and then what it should be. So it also corrects throughout the game. And then at the end of every day, you're following the same story. So you get kind of the answer to the mystery that you were working on. And then at the end of the week, it's 7 days. You get, you either win by getting promoted, and there's like competition within the game, or you lose by getting fired. And yeah, so we made it 1 week with the idea that we could add additional levels eventually, different styles of evaluating information. And then at the end of the week, there was also an assessment piece for us, for them kind of taking them away from the game, but analyzing what they learned from the game. and making sure they were getting out of it what we wanted them to. Here are some examples of like the information that they would sort. And then also there was an in-game wiki that one of our coders worked on with the idea that you could check between the information that you're getting and the information that you knew. Yeah.
So our successes, we built a playable game, and it was demonstrated for the campus by our interns and by other people in the library. And because of the presentation of the game, it actually led to more interest in infolit sessions within the library itself, using the game and also exploring different aspects of information literacy. And also, the interns gained a lot of confidence and work experience. They got to present a couple of times, added to their portfolios. Then librarians were used as references for job searches, so we were able to really connect with them as well. And it brought a spotlight to the library's approach to innovation, especially digitally, and created many long-lasting partnerships across campus, including game design, career services, PR, and the president's office. But our failures, ultimately, we were not able to use the game. Our IT services denied us server space in order to host it. And then during this time, we had some staffing turnover and less time to focus on the project. And then eventually we both left. But everything is well documented, where the procedures and instructions. So if there's more staff on, eventually they can pick it back up if they would like.
So yeah, as Leah mentioned, we're both in kind of different roles now. So we haven't really have an interest in working more on it, but we don't completely rule it out for the future. But we definitely learned a lot. It's very easy to have an idea, and it may even be easy to get find collaborators to try to carry it out. But ultimately, it's very hard to maintain digital scholarship work as librarians on a campus without infrastructure in place to support, especially from key players. All in all, we consider the project a success because the game was created, the students got a lot out of it, and we got to bring a spotlight to digital scholarship on our campus, even if it was briefly. And we're really proud of what we made. And we included the GitHub link with all the code if you're interested as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Halie and Leah. Next up, we have Kai.
Let's see. Can everyone see my slides? Not hearing otherwise, so I'm going to assume yes. So I am Kai Fei, Discovery and Access Strategic Projects Manager at Harvard Library, and today I'm talking about project management as community building and using as a case study for that, launching our collections digitization program. So Harvard Library has a long history of digitization and a lot of the infrastructure in place, but it's something that has historically happened sort of piecemeal, where each library is choosing their own projects that they want to put forward for digitization. And the goal of this project was to say, how can we come together across all of the libraries and all of the different professional schools, etc., to say, this is what we want to, as an entire library, focus on for digitization. So I am talking, there we go. So I'm going to start out with just some very basic definitions and then talk about using this as the case study, what are some of the tools and tricks that you can hopefully then also adapt for your own situations, for how to think about the project in terms of communications, in terms of who's part of the project team, how are you tracking it, what are you tracking it, and then finally, what were the outcomes from our specific project. So to get started, just a very basic definition of what is a project. It is a set of tasks with a defined timeline and accomplishing a specific goal. And I think that's useful to keep in mind given that scope creep is very real and it's so easy to always be adding the just one more thing or just one more thing, or maybe this could also be folded in, and to ultimately end up with something that's really unwieldy, never ending. And so defining, yes, things may change in the middle, you may need to pivot, but what exactly are you doing? When are you going to do it? And how are you going to do it? And I'm going to then talk about, as you think about communicating this out, this is before you're even talking to anyone. This is before you're presenting, defining for yourself and really making sure that you are rock solid on what are you doing. For us, as I mentioned, that was, we want to create a way to select themes and digitize content that is relevant to our students and to our faculty, and that we're bringing everyone across the library, regardless of which particular physical location or professional school they're part of, together to share information, to share best practices. And why that's important is because then when we think about how is this being communicated out, then there's this question of who are you presenting it to? Why do they need to know it? What do they need to know? If I imagine, for example, I'm presenting something to senior leadership, what they want to know about the project is very different than if I'm in a conversation with the back-end systems librarians who need to know the specifics of file naming specifications, or the photographers who want to know, are we capturing blank pages or not? And part of the communication is just making sure that you want to give people the information they need when they need it. So how did I do it on this project? I love color coding. This is something you'll see a few more times in here. And I split out communications of saying, what are all of these different audiences? Assign them each a color. So there's the entire library staff. There is the core project team. There's library leadership. There's our advisory group. Each of those people are going to need different things, but then by color coding them and putting them all on one timeline, it made it easy to see at a glance that maybe I and the weeds on this project have been thinking about it and living in it every day, but oops, I haven't shared anything to the entire staff in 4 months. So to anyone who hasn't been part of those very specific meetings, this project looks like it's just fallen into a void. And that's sort of why I think it's so important to have that clear idea of the vision, is because it's going to need to be explained slightly different to each group so that it's relevant to them and it doesn't just feel like, oh, someone's telling us this thing, or they want me to put the 10,000 other things on my to-do list aside to focus on this, and why does it matter? So knowing how to explain the relevance of this to each of those audiences was, I think, something that made this very successful in being so intentional on that. And then that also ties into the, how do you create the project team? And how do you balance wanting to bring in as many voices as possible, particularly voices that maybe have not historically been included in digitization? How can we get as much breadth without ending up with every decision is trying to be made by 200 people and it's completely unwieldy and impossible to manage? And so another variation on color coding that I did for this was trying to figure out who's part of that core advisory group. And again, I assigned colors based on different areas of expertise. So I could say, I know that I want to make sure that I have representation from both general collections and special collections, from our professional schools and from our core faculty in arts of sciences, which is basically everyone who's not the professional schools, from our imaging services staff and our conservation staff. And then go through and say, does the list of people I think I'm including capture all of these? the first draft we had of the core advisory group, we realized that for all we kept saying that one of the goals of this project was to increase representation from general collections, we had no general collections representation in the group. So we could go back and say, okay, we need to change that before we actually move this project forward. One of the changes, the second iteration, we realized partway through that we maybe are a little overrepresented in particularly library staff from the professional schools focused on special collections and digitization. And one of our project goals was to digitize things that are relevant to current research and teaching at the university. We realized we don't actually have any representation from access services or from our liaison librarians. And so that's going to be one of the changes we want to implement in the near future, is how can we move them in and maybe rotate off a couple of these people where we have 4 people filling roughly the same role. The flip side of that is then this is how do you create that very narrow core project team. The other piece we tried was how can we get in a very broad audience? And so we held a couple of open meetings for the entire library staff. We had already had the core group say, okay, 2 of the themes that we want to focus on are climate change and colonialism. But those can be very broad umbrellas. What's most relevant in there? How do we define it? We said open meeting, anyone in the library can come. We'll do virtual sticky notes for brainstorming. What should we be focusing on within that? What's maybe out of scope? Are there particular collections that people want to highlight? We went into this thinking that it would be great if we had 25 people attend and maybe each person could do 1 sticky note per theme. We ended up with about 35 people and well over 100 sticky notes. And we were then able to take that back to the small group again that we had asked to help write a specific scope notes for what's in and out of scope, so that they had a starting point and weren't working from scratch. And one of the changes that came out of that was that we actually ended up renaming colonialism to impact of colonialism instead. And this was, I think, really great for just letting people know that they didn't have to be part of the core project team to be part of the project, and that there were places for them to have a voice and to have an influence on this if they were interested in any way. And then the final piece is project tracking. And I know in project management land, there are so many different tools and so many different opinions on which tool is the best. Do I put this in Airtable? Do I use Jira? Do I use Trello? Do I use some combination of all of the above? And what I ended up settling on was really start simple. There are tools that can do a lot of really complicated things, but the more complicated it is, the longer it's going to take to set up. And is it really worth all of that startup cost and having to train people on it, if in fact this is a really small project where a spreadsheet is sufficient? I started out with a spreadsheet on this, ended up shifting over time to a fairly lightweight Trello board. And then the other question is, what are we recording? Which metrics are measuring our progress toward the project goals? And which metrics can our systems easily supply? And ideally, what's the intersection of those? That I don't want to be collecting a ton of metrics that don't really reflect anything. The flip side, I don't want to be trying to find metrics that it's taking me hours every week to try to pull them out using some complicated formula from a system that really doesn't want to spit them out. And then what do the metrics actually look like for this project? We have, in the roughly 18 months or so since this launched, we have 3 active themes: impact of colonialism, climate change, and an umbrella: equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, and anti-racism. We've had 5 open sessions for the library, completed 16 proposed collections so far, have 18 more in progress. It's involved in various ways about 100 staff members, and we've completed 445,000 newly digitized images that are now deposited in our digital repository and available to anyone either affiliated with the university or not. And so from my perspective, this has been really successful and something that could not have been done as one person or even a small group of people. It really did need that whole group. So thank you. And I will pass it to the next person.
Thank you, Kai. Next up is Simon.
Good afternoon. Just want to check, make sure everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Kai, thank you for kind of priming things. Turns out a lot of what I'm going to say builds on what you did. So good job. My name is Simon Ringsmuth. I'm a digital services librarian at Oklahoma State University, and I appreciate you all taking the time to be here this afternoon. I'm going to share some lessons that I've learned to help you plan and execute successful virtual panel discussions. A little bit of background and context. I have helped plan 3, if I may say so, fairly successful virtual panel discussions. These are all pretty large in scope. Each of the panel discussions has involved individuals from all around the state of Oklahoma in the planning process, and each was attended by people from all across the state and even beyond. We had, you could see the attendees that we had there in November 22. We had a panel discussion with 80 people attending. Then we had an AI panel a year later, 100 attendees. Then we had an online proctoring panel. It says 60 attendees. I heard from someone else who attended that recently that it was actually more like 100. I don't know. My measured said 60, but someone else who was monitoring said 100. A lot of people attended these. I worked to help pull these off. I have worked with a team of people on Oklahoma's Council for Online Learning Excellence to plan these panel discussions. All of the planning was done virtually. We never met in person, and then the panel discussion was held virtually as well. So we learned a lot about what it takes to make events like this happen, and I'm glad to be able to share some of these insights with you all today. These aren't difficult. Kind of like Kai said, these aren't big, complicated things that take months and years and millions of dollars. This is just simple, almost like process type of things that that you can do to help plan a successful virtual panel discussion. What to do, what not to do, and how to ensure success in these type of events. So the first part of a successful virtual panel discussion is putting together an effective team that's going to do the planning. Ideally, the team should be composed of people that you know or have worked with before, that you know you can count on to get things done. If that's not possible, then try to set aside time in your early planning meetings just to get to know everyone on the team. So getting to know the people involved is such an important part of making this successful. A lot of people like to volunteer for things, especially in the world of libraries, but sometimes people are not as eager to follow through on things. So if you know that there's effective people that you've worked with before on different events, see if you can get them on your team. A lot of this involves assigning tasks and expecting people to carry out those tasks, and your team needs to have people on it that can do this. You also have to find a compelling topic, find something that has broad appeal and interest. So when we were planning these panel discussions, esports and AI were both timely and attention grabbing. Online proctoring, though, wasn't flashy. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be flashy. It turns out a lot of people want to know about how to do successful online proctoring. So it was a really compelling topic, even though it wasn't a flashy topic in a lot of headlines. Topics that are big in the media are fine, but there's a lot of under the radar topics that are sort of daily nuts and bolts that people want to know about and they want expert opinions on. And these are great for a panel discussion. Next, give your planning team a lot of runway. You've got a lot to do, so give yourselves plenty of time to do it. The key part about all this is you want your discussion to be a success. I recommend 6 months. So it says start months in advance. I recommend 6 months in advance. You probably don't need 6 months, but the longer you give yourselves to get this whole process underway and then execute it, the more time you'll have as things come up and you need to adjust and maybe put off meetings and things like that. So you could probably do this in 3 months, but it wouldn't be as effective. Next, set up regular meetings. They don't have to be every single week. I recommend twice a month or every 3 weeks. Each meeting, though, needs to have an agenda. So things like we need someone at this meeting, we're going to talk about who's going to set the Zoom link, who's going to contact panelists, who's going to generate questions for the panelists, who's going to design a promotional flyer. And then even if you don't have anything specific to talk about, it's important to keep that meeting, because if you start canceling meetings and sending out emails saying, oh, there's nothing to talk about, we'll just cancel the meeting. Pretty soon people start to get the message that this panel discussion is not really a priority for those involved. So I'm not going to make it a priority as one of the planning people in the planning team. So you've got to set those meetings and then keep those meetings. Not everyone in the team can meet every single time. So frequent shorter meetings can help fill in those gaps. You also have to hold each other accountable for meeting the goals that you set out to accomplish. And this kind of piggybacks off what Kai said. You don't need complicated software to do this. Email is fine. Slack is fine. An Excel sheet is fine. If it turns out you need to go beyond that, then sure, set up a Trello board like Kai did, or use Jira or Monday.com. But a lot of times it's just communication is the key. Hold each other accountable for getting things done that people need to get done. When you assign tasks, check in at the next meeting to see how things are going. Don't berate people for not getting things done. Everyone's busy, everyone's volunteering. So just say, if someone can't get something done, no worries, we'll get it done next time. And finally, generate some initial questions for the panelists and share them well in advance. This is one of the times that AI can come to your rescue. You can use AI to help generate some questions for your panelists. You want this to be a positive experience for the panelists as well, not just the planning team. So get them the questions in advance. As far as the format of a virtual panel discussion, 60 to 120 minutes works really, really well. 90 minutes is good. I wouldn't do any shorter than 60 or certainly any longer than 2 hours. Start with, as far as the general format of that time then, we've had great success starting with a presentation from an expert. So if you're doing a 90-minute panel discussion, start with a 20-minute presentation from a subject matter expert and hold questions to the end. But then you can transition into the panel discussion. So you've got an expert presentation at the beginning, and then panel discussion talking about the questions that you generated and submitted to them. And then at the end, you can take audience input for all of those, for the expert and the panelists. For the online proctoring panel, we had a lawyer from Oklahoma, from a university in Oklahoma, talk about some of the legal aspects of online proctoring and share some case study examples. And that gave the audience some unique insight into an element of online proctoring from a primary source. And then have the panel discussion be moderated by someone on the planning team. It's important to get audience input using the Zoom question answer, the chat, but just like this one that we're in here, the lightning round, save it for the end, and have someone kind of go through the questions, look for duplicates, things like that. Another note, I recommend using Zoom for the format. Don't upset the apple cart using Google Meet or something else. Zoom is pretty standard. A lot of people know about it. So if you introduce a new variable, like, hey, we're going to try this other meeting tool, that's kind of a barrier to entry. So I would recommend just sticking with what works. And then finally, after all the planning, the success part of a virtual panel discussion comes down to the execution. You can plan for months and still not have a great event if it's not executed well, but got some tips for you. The most important thing is active, pragmatic moderation. Ask the questions and let the panelists answer, but then you got to move along to the next question. Don't let one panelist dominate the discussion. Encourage the quiet panelists to answer, because you might have experts on your panel, but one of them is maybe a little timid, or maybe they feel overshadowed by someone else. So as the moderator, you have to be pragmatic and active and involved, and keep those panelists involved and just make sure things are going. You can just cut off people. If everyone's answered the question, you can just jump in and say, thank you all for the great input. Now let's move on to the next question. It's difficult to overstate the importance of active, pragmatic moderation. You don't have to you don't have to rule with an iron fist, but the audience is expecting things to move along. And if it's not moderated, you're going to find the panel kind of wandering off on tangents and not really addressing what the audience wants them to say. Follow the format that you set out. you send out an agenda in advance to anyone who's attending, and certainly the panelists and the presenter. So you got to stick to that format. If you say 20 minutes for the presenter at the beginning, stick to that 20 minutes. It all goes back to that active moderation. Make sure the chat is moderated, but not by the panel discussion moderator. Have someone else on the planning team moderate the chat, and then be in charge of doing the question answer at the end. And finally, just stay positive. Don't let the panelists or participants know if you're stressed or worried. Don't let that seep into what you're saying in general. Don't be like, oh my goodness, we're so stressed about this. Just be positive. The audience takes their cues from you. So if you show up to the panel discussion kind of haggard and frazzled about things, and oh my goodness, you wouldn't believe how much work it was and how crazy it was to do all this, the participants are going to notice. So remain cool, calm, and collected, and that will also send a message that things are going according to plan. So I hope these tips helped, and I'm always curious to hear from you if you have any questions. There's my email if you would like to get in touch. Thank you so much. I appreciate the chance to share this.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thanks to all of our presenters today. So now we have time for just a few questions. If anyone would like to ask a question, please feel free to unmute or place it in the chat. So our first question is from Elizabeth. It's for Kelly. How do you promote the digital exhibits? Were they featured on the website, or did you send out emails?
A combination of the two. One was that we had a newsletter that we put out every once in a while, so they were included in that, which was sent out to the entire faculty, staff, and student lists. And they were featured on the website as a tile. And since we tried to keep up with them, that was another thing I didn't mention, is that we tried to organize it so we were always having something fresh about every 2 months or so. That sort of kept that fresh as well. And we also tried to advertise on campus a little bit, perhaps in flyers in the elevator. They also had a digital sort of bulletin board where we put that up. Something we also did was in the physical displays, we always included a QR code that took you to the digital guide so that you could then access also the digital materials included within.
And Isaac has a question for Simon. What did outreach for your panels look like? How did you get the information in front of relevant audiences?
It's a great question, Isaac. So the Council for Online Learning Excellence that I worked with to plan these discussions, we're made up of people who represent universities from all across the state of Oklahoma. And so we kind of had a built-in outreach where people would just kind of spam mailing lists at their particular universities. That worked out really well. I think there might have been something on social media, but it wasn't, we really didn't get a lot of participants that way. Most of it came from sort of the direct contact between people on this whole organization and contacts at the universities who could get these things out. And once we had a PDF, like a flyer with a Zoom link and things like that, that PDF just got mailed out to everybody. And then Jenny asked about moderators. Nobody that I've worked with has moderator training. I've moderated 2 of these panel discussions, and then someone named Amanda Cassia moderated another one. And I think we're just sort of, I'm a former high school English teacher, and so I'm used to kind of working a crowd. But formal moderator training would certainly be important if someone wants to be a more effective moderator. And Kelly thank you, Kelly. That's great, Kelly. That's some good input on the chat.
Any additional questions?
Thanks, Kai. Appreciate. Kai just had a link in the chat about facilitation training. I might check that out. I appreciate it.
Well, last call. Okay. So thank you everyone for attending today. On the screen is a QR code for an evaluation for today's program. I'm also going to put the link in the chat. Please take a moment and fill out this evaluation. We always try to offer programming that meets the needs of the Digital Scholarship Section members, as well as the larger community. So please fill out that evaluation. Thank you very much to everyone who presented today, and thank you so much for attending this event. Have a wonderful day.